Some years ago, a group of young girls were sitting in my kitchen, friends of my daughter's, girls who had over time adopted me and started calling me Mom. And that day they were talking to me openly about their pain. As I sat there listening, I heard something underneath their words, something I recognized. A longing I knew not from the outside, but from the deepest part of myself. Because no matter how old you get, there is still a part of you that is a child, longing for a mother, for the version of a mother you believed you were supposed to have, for the love you deserved and didn't fully receive. And when you don't get that, it leaves something behind, a void, an emptiness that can follow us for the rest of our lives if we don't understand where it came from. What I heard that day in my kitchen has a name. It's called the mother wound. Today we're going back to where it started, and I promise you, by the end of this, it will make sense. All of it. I am one of 7 daughters. Conversations have been had over the years between us sisters, in the way you do when you're trying to make sense of something you all lived through, but nobody ever named it out loud. And every one of us have expressed that same longing in one way or another. The longing for a mother who was there but couldn't quite reach us. But those conversations were never had with her, because some conversations were never going to be possible. Not because we didn't need to have them, but because she simply didn't have the capacity to hold them. She was present, she went through the motions, but she always felt like the wallpaper of my life. There in the background, just not quite there. She felt more like a sibling than a mother. She couldn't meet emotions, hers or anyone else's. She was always a fearful person. The world always seemed too big for her. And when it became too much, she simply shut down and retreated. I used to find myself wondering how a woman like that had been given 7 daughters. 7 girls who needed to be held in their feelings, guided through them, shown that emotion was safe, and she had nothing in her to give us that. It took me years to understand why, and when I finally did, I had to go back further than my own story, all the way back to hers. My grandmother, my mother's mother, had lost 2 babies before my mother was born. She came into motherhood already carrying grief. And then she was diagnosed with cancer. For most of my mother's childhood, she was in and out of the hospital. My grandfather was a truck driver, gone for long stretches, trying to provide for his family. He had to leave his 2 children in my great-grandfather's care. And my mother was just a little girl, trying to love a mother she was never sure would still be there tomorrow. Most of this I pieced together slowly over the years. The full picture was never handed to me, just fragments. Small moments my mother let slip, without ever expressing more than an experience. The profound understanding of this came to me when a suitcase was brought to me. My grandmother's suitcase, decades after her death. Inside, I found a letter, in my mother's handwriting. Even as a child, she had the most remarkable penmanship. The letter she had written to her mother in the hospital. And what stayed with me was how ordinary it felt, the tone of it. Like this was simply something she did. A child who had grown used to her mother being in the hospital, asking about a birthday party, wanting to make sure she could go, and that her mom could get a gift for her friend. I sat with that letter, and tears welled. Because in those words, I didn't see the mother who raised me. I saw a little girl, a scared, lonely little girl who had learned to keep going in the middle of something no child should ever have to carry alone. Only my mother holds the full truth of her story. Her landscape may look very different from everything I have come to understand, and I respect that. But tracing back as far as I could, this is what I found. And it changed something in me. It allowed me to hold grace for her, to see her not as the woman who hurt me, but as that child first. That didn't remove the pain of how she chose to move through the world. It didn't erase what I experienced as her daughter. And I have asked myself the question. I know others have asked it too. Why couldn't she see the wound and choose differently for her girls, the way some of us have? The way some of us, having lived inside the same pain, decided to let it end with us. That I can never answer. Why a soul would choose not to create something differently from the pain they were handed, I don't know. She never seemed able to move past it, as though the pain had become more comfortable to live inside of than to move through. It was too familiar, and I can only imagine that a child who lived through what she lived through would cling to the familiar as a false sense of safety, even when the familiar was the very thing causing the pain. Maybe your story doesn't look exactly like mine. Maybe your mother wasn't dealing with illness. Maybe she was right there in the house, at the dinner table, at every school play. And you still felt like you were longing for her. Maybe she was the kind of woman that the world looked at and called devoted. And you spent years not understanding why you still felt so alone in her presence. Why her love always felt like it came with conditions you couldn't quite meet. Why you were always reaching and always coming up slightly short. Or maybe yours was a mother whose pain took up all the space in the room, where you learned very early to make yourself smaller, to need less, to not add to the weight she was already carrying. Maybe she was someone who left, physically or emotionally, and you spent years wondering what it was about you that made you so easy to leave. Maybe she was genuinely loving, but so wrapped up in survival and keeping everything together, that tenderness got lost somewhere in the middle of it all. The shape of the wound is different for all of us, but underneath every version of it, there is the same small child, waiting on the step, hoping to be chosen, hoping to be seen, hoping that this time the love will feel like enough. The mother wound often lives in the silence between what happened and what never did. It doesn't always come from a mother who was cruel or absent in ways the world would easily recognize. Sometimes it comes from a mother who was simply not available in the ways you needed, who couldn't offer consistency or warmth, or the kind of love that makes a child feel like they are enough just by existing. And when a child doesn't receive that, they don't think, my mother is wounded. They think, there must be something wrong with me. And that belief becomes the foundation everything else is built on. The mother wound doesn't just live in memory, it lives in the body, in the anxiety that rises when someone goes quiet and you immediately assume you've done something wrong, in the way your shoulders tightened when you sense disapproval, in the exhaustion of always reading the room, always bracing, always managing the emotional temperature of the people around you. That hypervigilance didn't come from nowhere. It was learned in a home where love felt unpredictable, where you had to stay alert to stay safe, and your body never forgot. And here's where it gets complicated, because the mother wound, like all wounds we don't deal with, doesn't stay in childhood. It follows us into the partners we choose, who recreate that same familiar feeling of reaching for someone who is just slightly out of reach, into the way we love over functioning, earning, proving, rather than simply receiving, into the voice inside our heads that is never quite satisfied, never quite convinced that we are enough. That voice is often the echo of a love that came with conditions. And we internalize it so deeply that we begin saying to ourselves what was never said to us with warmth. And there is one more place the mother wound shows up that we rarely talk about. in our relationships with other women. Because when we didn't receive what we needed from our mother, we often go looking for it elsewhere. In friendships, in mentors, in older women whose approval feels disproportionately important. And sometimes we feel triggered by certain women without understanding why. A woman who reminds us of what we longed for or what was withheld. And that quietly feeds the sister wound, the competition, the comparison, the difficulty trusting other women fully. If that resonates with you, I did a whole episode on the sister wound and why women struggle to fully support each other. I'll leave the link below so you can go deeper on that one. Because it all traces back to the same root, the little child still waiting on the step. Healing the mother wound doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It doesn't mean performing forgiveness you don't yet feel. It doesn't mean calling her and having a conversation that may never be possible or may never go the way you need it to. Healing means something quieter than that, something more honest. It means accepting what is, not what could have been, not what should have been, not what you deserved, what is. Because there is something I have come to know deeply. You cannot look to the person who hurt you to heal you. That is not where your healing lives. And when we place our healing in another person's hands, we give away the very power we need to find our way through. It starts with understanding, which you have already begun just by remaining here in this conversation. It continues with compassion. For your mother, yes, but first and most importantly, for you. For the child you were, for everything you carried. That child deserved more. And at some point in this journey, there is a moment where you have to decide. Does this cause more harm than good to keep carrying? The longing for something that may never be? Is it time to put it down? Because it has lived in your body long enough. Because you are tired of looking for her among people who can never fill that void. Because you are ready, finally, to stop abandoning yourself the way you were abandoned. And here's what I want to offer you, something that helped me. When we stop expecting people to be anything different than what they are, we free ourselves from inside the wound to the other side of it. It's like expecting the sun to come out when the forecast is rain. If you spend a whole week hoping for sun, waiting for sun, living for sun, while it rains every single day, you stop living that week. You miss it entirely, waiting for something that was never coming. When you accept the forecast, you don't stop wishing for sun. You just stop letting the rain steal your life. And that is where your power lives, not in their transformation, in yours. Some of us reach this moment and we choose differently. We decide consciously, deliberately, that the wound ends here, that our children, our relationships, our inner inner life will not be shaped by something we had no hand in creating. That is one of the most courageous decisions a person can ever make. And the way back to yourself, the actual path of it, is through the repeated act of turning toward yourself with kindness, of noticing when the old wound is taking up too much space in your life, of learning to be the mother to yourself that you needed and didn't have. Because awareness to see the wound, that is the key to laying it down. If this resonates with you, I've created something for you, a gift, a guided return to unconditional self-love bundle. You can find the link below. And if you want to be part of these conversations in this community, I encourage you to follow, subscribe, and leave a comment. And with tenderness and compassion, I want to offer you this soul musing for reflection. In the search for her, we wander the barren lands of our childhood, like a ghost, longing for a connection that may never come. But in becoming our own mother, we find a doorway back to ourselves. And I'll leave you with these reflections to sit with. When did you first learn to make yourself smaller to manage someone else's emotional limits? And what did that cost you? In your adult relationships, where do you recognize the mother wound still speaking? Where are you still waiting on the step? Is there an expectation you are still carrying about your mother that is costing you your peace? Because I truly believe that when we begin healing ourselves, we create more compassion, more understanding, and ultimately a better world for everyone. With much love, I'll see you in the next video. Do your soul.